everyone. My name is Mariota. If you didn't catch me introducing myself a moment ago, it's great to see you all here tonight for Let's Talk About Bullying with Dr. Louise Egan. Firstly, I'm Mariota and I organise the events here. We're always looking for ways to help parents support their kids, their education, their well-being, their future, and everything else in between, because we know everything is completely connected. Tonight, we want to talk about bullying, which is something that affects every child in some way, whether they experience it themselves or they see it happening to others. With the combination of school plus kids' online lives these days, we know it's a big worry to parents, and knowing how to help them isn't always easy. That's why we're joined tonight by Dr. Louise, who's a clinical psychologist specializing in child and adolescent mental health. Louise has worked with kids, families, and schools for over 18 years, and she previously hosted My Tutor's Exam Season Parenting, our course for parents, and House School earlier this year. I'm really excited for us to learn more about bullying from Louise's expertise. Welcome, Louise.
Oh, thank you for such a lovely, warm welcome. So just to add to that, my experience in child and adolescent mental health services, as well as supporting adults when they may present to clinical services, has highlighted to me throughout my career how prolific bullying is, and children and adults often do report bullying as part of their experiences when we're asking them to share with us how they may have developed a sense of self when they may present to clinical services.
Thank you so much, Louise. And now, just before I kick off with questions, we'll move on to the Q&A with me until 6:40 p.m. And we've incorporated lots of parents' questions into these as well. So hopefully there'll be something that everyone is interested in. So that's until 6:40 before we move on to questions from all of you. So please add your questions, if you can, via the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your Zoom window, because that means that we don't lose your questions in the chat. And if you do want to chip in and share your thoughts and feelings in the chat as well, we'd love to hear from you as well. So firstly, the first question from me, how would you define bullying, Louise?
Well, mentally healthy schools, as part of the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families, gives us a really good definition that bullying's targeted behaviour that's repetitive and persistent. And it describes as often a power imbalance between the child that is being bullied and the child that's bullying. Bullying can take many, many different forms. So we're aware that bullying can be verbally, in terms of name calling and poking fun, saying hurtful or undermining comments. Bullying can be emotionally abusive in terms of individuals making threats, spreading rumours, excluding children, maybe telling lies about children. And then there's the physical abuse and bullying that we often hear of, the hitting, the scratching, the punching, the fighting. And then in the new generation of our children's lives, cyberbullying is rife, where individuals may send threatening, demeaning, hurtful, undermining messages, videos and pictures. Just being excluded from a social media group can feel very difficult for children. And there can be malicious sharing of videos and messages via cyberbullying. And there's also that form of bullying where individuals are a bystander, where they may be colluding, not standing up, they may be watching or joining in with a bully that's bullying another, or doing nothing about it.
Thanks so much for that definition. I found that particularly helpful because it can be hard sometimes, can't it, to tell the difference between what is bullying and what is teenagers or what is children, what is perhaps occasional bad behavior, but what you said about it being targeted and persistent is a really helpful definition there. And then why today, I mean, we touched on this a bit with your mention of cyberbullying, but why do you, Louise, feel that it's important for us to talk about bullying today?
Well, I think that old generational saying of sticks and stones will hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me is just simply not true. We do know bullying has a long-lasting effect on children, and our children are exposed to so many influences now, not just locally, nationally, and globally. So we know that bullying can have a massive impact on a child's mental health, their physical health, their academic performance, and their relationships. And we do know that bullying has tragically led to children taking their own lives. And as I said earlier, in my career, I often hear of children and adults who present to clinical services, share their experiences of bullying and how that shaped their mental health. And it's very important that we talk openly about what bullying is in order so that we can identify and intervene earlier. It's important that we talk very openly about the common impact of bullying on people's lives so that children can feel that they're not alone. It's super important that we do share how to get help early to reduce that impact and share the range of support services that are available so children know who to turn to and where to go to for help. And although some people might think of it as a normal stage, lots of children go through bullying, it shouldn't be tolerated and neither should it be ignored. We need to talk about it as adults because children's brains are still developing and they don't have our wisdom and our problem solving strategies, our long-term thinking and our experience. They need us to take a lead in talking openly, identifying and supporting and helping them manage it. So it's a very important topic to be addressing this evening.
Yeah, of course. And as you've touched on a bit, we have historically, when people think of bullying, they may think simply of school. There's the playground, there's after school, the way on the way to and from school. But of course, today the number of different places online, platforms, websites, where kids can engage with each other is obviously just so much wider than it was when any parents here would have been at school. Even over 10 years ago when I was still in school. But how would you define, Louise, where a child can experience bullying? So where we can look out for?
I think all of the places that you've just mentioned, of course, siblings can bully their children, their siblings, should I say, when you're out and about playing in your local communities, the kids that you're coming into contact with in the extracurricular activities, maybe from similar age children or older age children. Then we've got the school playground, school canteen, anywhere in school. And then, like you say, on the World Wide Web, on these social messaging and media sites. So as we've aged, our children are exposed to so many more experiences that might increase their vulnerability to be bullied by others.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on a bit how some adult clients who you see refer often back to their younger experiences of bullying. But I'm interested for you to expand on what really the impact is of bullying on a child.
So when we think about what bullying does to our psychological well-being, it unhelpfully shapes our core beliefs about ourselves, the world, and other people. And when we think about the beliefs that we have about ourselves, our self-concept and our self-esteem, that's our overall opinion that we have of ourselves, how we judge and evaluate ourselves, what we think we're good at and not so good at, how we compare favourably to others. Are we worthy, acceptable, good enough, loving, deserving, for example? And bullying can interfere with that core belief development and unhelpfully shape negative core beliefs. So bullying impacts significantly on self-esteem development. And we know that self-esteem is a cornerstone to positive emotional well-being. It's a fundamental building block to social and emotional security. And we know that children learn best when they're socially and emotionally secure. And when we think about how it might well shape core beliefs about others, we might develop beliefs that others are hurtful and harmful, untrustworthy, no one will help. And bullying can shape those views of the world, that the world's an unsafe place. And if stress of bullying persists, it can keep our stress hormones elevated. And that can impact on our physical and mental well-being. Bullying can lead to emotionally based school avoidance. And bullying and its impact on self-esteem. Self-esteem's linked to so many poor outcomes and links to many psychological difficulties such as depression and anxiety and trauma and self-harm. It can lead to poor social functioning and dropping out of school. And like you say, I do speak to adults who look back and are able to tell me that maybe the seed of self-doubt in their life began from a bullying experience. And we know patterns of self-esteem established in our childhood can be carried with us into our adult years. And it's a vulnerability factor, like I say, can increase our vulnerability to suffer a whole host of difficulties. And what's really important in thinking about short and long-term effects and the severity of those effects is to always remember the individual's perception of what's going on. And if the individual interprets what's going on in a major way, whether an adult or somebody else believes it to be relatively minor, if it's major to the child, it should be major to us.
That sounds like such a key point there, because it's easy often for teachers and for adults to perceive what a child is saying as overreacting, or because often teenagers are known for being up and down emotionally or react strongly to things. But that's so important for parents and teachers to bear in mind, isn't it? If it's major to the child, then it is major to them.
Yeah.
And you touched on it a bit as well in terms of like missing school, and self-esteem. Of course, it has an impact on everything, but looking a bit more into a child's education and the impact of bullying on there, would you say there are any other impacts that it can have?
It can lead a child to have a very threat-sensitive view of the world in terms of what's coming next during lessons, the snide comments, as well as what might be happening during unstructured time. And carrying that threat-orientated view of the world and what it does to our stress levels can lead children to feel quite dysregulated, hypervigilant and always on the alert. And when we're not settled and soothed, when our emotional states and our brains aren't rested and digested, actually makes it very difficult to reach the learning brain. So we need to be regulated, settled and soothed to best relate to ourselves and others, to really then access our reasoning and learning brain. So bullying and stress can interfere with how children process information, how they remember, how they attend, how they make use of their education in terms of the neuroscience. And like I said, that social and emotional security, fundamental building blocks to our well-being and how we can make best use of our learning. And I have in my career worked with lots of children whose bullying experiences or their version of the world has led to it very difficult to be in school and to learn on a mainstream curriculum. So they can miss significant chunks of their education and suffer from emotionally based school avoidance. Of course, they can fall behind. Falling behind might increase worries, and then children get into this very negative cycle that accidentally maintains itself. So undeniably, bullying can have a significant impact on a child's ability to make best use of their learning and attain in education.
And we see all the time at my tutor as well how the single biggest factor, whether a child is bullied or not, the biggest factor in how a child performs in their exams is their self-esteem and their confidence. And so in relation to what you say, I mean, it does, everyone here will know already that bullying shouldn't happen to any child, and any parent here, of course, will desperately want to protect their child from bullying. But these things, the way that you've articulated the impact it can have, I think it's useful in terms of the broader context. But since I think everyone here is on side of wanting to protect the children in our community from bullying, as a starter question for how we can tackle it as a community, what would you say is the role of a child's teachers and other school members and staff when it comes to bullying?
I think they have to adopt a whole school approach in their role. And that's building really strong relationships with parents and carers, that they can have everyday conversations. So when the big difficult conversations come up, there's that established communication channel. I think schools and teachers need to seek out training to learn how to identify, to tackle, and to manage, and to be able to do that confidently, to know what to do. The role of a school and teacher has to have a zero tolerance approach to bullying at its heart, and to have a very firm, non-judgmental, non-shaming approach that might separate the bullying behaviour that might be going on with the child from the child itself, to not shame the child. And I think schools have to have a very keen awareness of their environment, how unstructured time happens, in order to monitor and moderate any incidents of bullying. And more specifically, staff need to be able to listen and to seek to understand that child's individual experience of what's going on in school. Schools and teachers have to be a trusted, secure base where children feel confident that if there is an issue, they can go to the parent, they can go to the teacher or the school, and they'll be believed. And it'll be an open conversation that's non-defensive and non-shaming. And teachers and schools have to lead by example, and they have to reinforce appropriate behaviour and scaffold the skill development in personal and human development, informally as well as formally, through the curriculum, through PHSE and RSE. They need to teach inclusivity and diversity. They need to teach empathy and tolerance of each other, and how to build relationships and teach each other with kindness, how to manage difficult situations. But they have to take a lead on establishing policies and procedures and following them through. There needs to be clear instructions to pupils and teachers as to what happens if they witness or experience bullying, and how you deal with them, how you implement a plan, and an accountable plan that is regularly reviewed. And specific people within school to have key roles, such as a designated safeguarding lead and the SENCO. Their role has to be one that's knowledgeable about the additional support services out there for parents and children. They have to be able to be clear on how they monitor how well the procedures and their work with additional support services are going. They have to work in partnership to safeguard children. They have to kind of hold themselves accountable, and they have to know where to go and when, and be creative in their role when maybe public services don't have capacity to respond. So have an awareness of what other resources in the independent world and the charitable and voluntary sector are available to help them in supporting children as in their role as teachers in schools.
So a really joined up and concerted approach, rather than, just the SENCO or just the guidance counsellor. So if every member of the school is part of the body protecting children,
absolutely,
that's the most effective. And in education as well, as you say.
Yeah. So it's that whole school approach, but like you say, it's working together in partnership to safeguard and best support children, and in partnership, most importantly, with the children and families. Seeking to understand, like I said earlier, asking them about what they would like to happen, involving them in their plans, and monitoring that to hopefully make meaningful change. We say that no long-term meaningful change can ever happen with a child's mental health unless it's understood and managed through all of the systems that operate around the child.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask a question around quite a common approach to bullying and to kind of the school environment, which I've heard a lot over the years, and even in recent cultural references, is that if a teacher intervenes, if a child is being bullied, then it can make them be more bullied, because it's highlighting them from the crowd. What is your view of this approach, that kids should learn to protect themselves when they're being bullied?
I think it's really hard for children to protect themselves by themselves. Like I said, their brain is yet fully developed. It's very complex. They don't have access to the problem solving, the wisdom, the experiences that we have. So I think it's where the training and the responsibility has to be held by the teachers and the schools to skillfully spot, to open up opportunities, sensitive, private opportunities, to work in collaboration with the child, asking what their wishes may well be, so that they can manage it very sensitively to reduce the fears of the child coming true, in the child's mind, are actually real in real life. And unfortunately, we have heard only too often how an accidental or deliberately unskillful approach to managing bullying can exacerbate. But if the intention, the skill, the knowledge, the training, the approach is all psychologically well informed with reassurance, hopefully that will open up an opportunity to reduce the bullying.
Mm-hmm. And because, of course, a lot of bullying can happen out of sight, whether it's on the school bus or online, as we've mentioned. And often a parent will be the first person to notice if something's a bit wrong, if their child isn't being themselves. And they're hopefully like the most likely person for a child to open up to first as well. And then in terms of tackling these problems, if it does relate back to the child's school community, what would you say a good relationship looks like between the child, their parents, and the school as well?
I think there's got to be a positive, trusting connection with good communication and good contact. For the school and the parent to be equally invested, holding that child's journey and experiences in mind, that are very well intended, to spot when difficulties might arise and to act soon, sensitively, together in partnership and understanding the child's world. Everybody's got to be speaking and talking, sharing and working together, but also a relationship that's built on trust, and that positive action, that the parents and teachers in their relationship will act on what they're hearing in a positive way to best manage.
And so if some of the parents listening to hear, they hear what you say, but they feel that a good relationship hasn't been proactively built by their school, or they find it difficult to get in touch, like there isn't an obvious mode of communication with their school, what can a parent do if that ecosystem isn't already there?
The ecosystem should be there, and we know that that's not always the case, but parents can access third sector organisations. I know up in Lancashire we call it parent partnership, where there is an organisation that acts as a go-between between parents and educations. If there are difficulties there, you can ask to speak to the designated safeguarding lead, whose role is around these issues. And if it's impacting on the child's ability to engage in their education, the SENCO, the Special Educational Needs Coordinator. And if those channels of communication in the school are non-forthcoming, you can reach out to the governing body. And if you're still not getting the response, you can reach out to the local authority or the academy trust for advice. But if you feel like your attempts to share and best manage bullying is falling on deaf ears, try not to lose faith and hope. Keep going, because schools do have responsibilities when there may be a follow-on of bullying outside of the school environment that started and is linked to the school environment. So try and find new ways, try and be persistent. But you can complement the approach that you might be taking with school in thinking about what independent services are there out there, what voluntary sector organisations, what charitable sector organisations are out there, as well as what other public statutory agencies and services are out there. So turning to your GP for referral into child and adolescent mental health services, to access mental health practitioners or mental health workers or clinical psychologists. And then in terms of charities out there and very helpful forums, I mentioned Mental Healthy Schools and the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families, Couth, which is an online text and messaging service, an anonymous text and messaging service for adolescents who may be experiencing a whole host of mental health challenges. The school nurse can be a really key public professional to reach out to, and they may well be able to refer into public services. And then if your child is covered as a dependent on any private medical insurance you may well have, and your medical insurance may cover you for emotional disorders, you may be able to access mental health support for your child, who may be able to advise you as a parent how to best enlist the school, work with the school and support your child through your private medical insurance. There are a whole host of mental health apps out there that you can access or buy, download, that would help your child with their mental health. Social stories, and there are lots of PHSE and RSE companies that teach emotional literacy, and teach children how to develop in well-rounded ways that may be able to offer you resource, knowledge and guidance. In other avenues, if you're not getting what you need from school, turning to celebrity reports, YouTube videos of celebrities that have been through something similar. And a lot of the charities and online forums that I mentioned, Samaritans and Childline and Kidscape and NSPCC, have a lot of reports of youngsters who they themselves have been bullied and how they sought help and how their experience of help worked out for them. You can report bullying to the social media site. So there's an avenue, if school's not helping, how you might be able to manage. And you can report child exploitation and online protection issues to the Child Exploitation Online Protection Centre. And of course, if there is a hate crime happening in this bullying, you're well within your rights to report that to the police. So there are a lot of other public, a lot of other independent and charitable organisations that you might galvanise and capitalise on the different support from each and every one of those services if you're not getting what you want from school, perhaps.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for listing all of these services there. I've linked everyone in the chat to a few of those top ones that you mentioned. And to everyone who signed up for this event, we'll send out an email tomorrow morning with the list of all of the services that Louise recommends. So don't worry if there's one that you didn't catch just there. That's really useful because it's really great if in the relationships between institutions and parents and kids can be built in this way, but it's so important for families to have a plan B if they do need to create, improvise and create their own support system to help tackle bullying if their child's experiencing it. And just to touch again on the cyber issue of cyberbullying, which is arguably harder because obviously people can be anonymous on there, and certain behaviors don't always mean that kids do get banned from platforms, perhaps as it appears they should be. What's your advice, Louise, for if someone's child is being bullied by like, let's say a faceless or an anonymous bully online?
I think you can report that to the online social media or forum that you're on. You can remove your child or block. You can think about the privacy settings that your child has on there. You can think about how you can support your child in what they're sharing. So it's about being interested and sitting down with your child, support them in safe and appropriate use. You can think about supporting them to monitor their own use too, and restricting various time and access to various websites. But what we say is restriction can find them finding out other routes to get these things. It's appropriate to have open conversations and coaching. I suppose it's understanding why your child might want to be on that website and what they're exposed to. And like I say, having a zero tolerant approach for it. Just because it's online doesn't mean that it's not felt in a very hurtful or harmful way. And some of the boundaries that you might want to put in place. There's a lovely website, internetmatters.org, that can give parents guidance on how they can set up boundaries. But it's our children developing in this technological era. We call them digital natives, and actually they may be engaging in the cyber and online world without the skills. So it's about helping them develop the skills to use these sites and socialise to best support them. I know ChildsNet helps a lot with that too.
Thank you so much. And I've linked everyone to Internet Matters there as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
So we've had a really great chat about what bullying is and what the ideal ecosystem looks like, both with schools and with these external resources. But if we turn to look just at the home environment and kind of the act of daily parenting, what can parents do? For some more context, particularly with teenagers, who my tutor students often are, teenagers can be some of the hardest people to squeeze out information from, or to get to open up if they're upset. So even just finding out if a child is being bullied or what really is the cause of their upset can be the first challenge. So yeah, what's your advice in terms of caring for your child at home?
I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's not always easy to form that connection as parents would ideally like, but it really is that connection that needs to be there before kind of correcting anything that might be going on in their life. So that connection enables an opportunity for us to seek to understand. So think creatively about any way you can strengthen that positive connection with your child and open up positive time together in age appropriate, activities that you both enjoy, opening regular time to talk. Just generally, if you talk about the everyday things, it may make it more likely that when there are the bigger things in a child or adolescent's life, they're more likely to come to us there. And trying to be available. We talk about this phenomenon that's happening in terms of professional poverty. Many of us as professional parents are always answering emails or messages, always on the go, and that can limit our emotional availability to our children. So being aware the need to be consistently available for our children. But if we increase love and a sense of belonging in family relationships, that might help children weather the storm if they feel like they don't belong or are unacceptable within their peer group. So any opportunities that we can find to increase positive self-esteem through general praise and specific praise and sharing with others what makes us feel great and proud of the children in our lives. Modeling kindness and acceptance in your relationships can help you support your children when they're going through difficult experiences, and demonstrating your own kind of compassionate friend to yourself when difficulties might be happening, when you may feel on the outside, when you may not have been invited, when you may have experienced some bullying techniques. So showing you're working out, showing how you make sense of things and what you do to help yourself manage challenges can support your children. But it's very important that we agree a plan with the children in our lives if they are experiencing. We talk openly. We accept it's very, very difficult, and we're curious as to what might be going on. But we sit in that empathic role of, yeah, this is really tough, and we're here for you for as long as you need. And we might need to get creative and open up opportunities for friendships that treat children well, and maybe nurture those sorts of friendships and activities that might open up a different pocket of friendships for children, and helping them engage in activities that promote positive well-being to buffer the impact of what bullying may have on their well-being. But for parents to take it seriously, to keep a log, to take action, to spot early and intervene earlier to give us the best chance of reducing distress in the longer term.
And something you've touched on there is one of these sort of age-old, often teenage parent conversations, which is around parents' judgments of who are good influences and bad influences, or good friends and bad friends. And of course, as you touched on, teenagers, they're learning so much through their socializing. So it's often good if they have a friend who perhaps ends up being a bad friend who they learn a lot from. They're learning what makes good connections. But I wonder if you have any advice, because telling teenagers who to hang out with or what to do can be pretty much impossible. I wonder if you do have any advice on tackling that sort of conversation, particularly with a teenager, around their peers and the influence of their social groups.
Yeah. it is a very, very difficult one that I've heard many, many times in clinical settings. And I think what we need to be able to do is move from controlling, restricting, to coaching, really, and trying to open up opportunities to accept it's really tough when parents don't want their kids to be doing A, B, C, and D, and share your thinking in a digestible, small bite size way that's not lecturing, because they'll quickly shut down, but ask for their opinion. State the dilemma and ask for their ideas and how you can come to some arrangement together, and be committed to trying things and trusting each other to have a go at things. And if things don't work out, going back to the drawing board. But we know control and restriction often has the kids digging in their heels. And it might be you have to get very subtle or creative, kind of under the radar of encouraging certain friendships, or maybe family relationships where there are positive role models, or in getting the kids as best we can at that age engaged in some kind of structured, organised sport or activity that might offer more supervision and scaffolding. But it is a very complex developmental and family task that's not got a watertight do A, B, C, and D and you will have solved it all. A complex interplay of all of those factors, and just trying your best. Parenting is very, very difficult, and it will push parents to their limits. And none of us are born with a textbook or computer program that tells us what to do. So as a child's learning, parents are learning too. So I mentioned earlier about modelling, being a compassionate friend to help your child with their emotional well-being. It's about practicing some compassionate parenting too. That we try to be courageous as parents in our approach, but we have to treat ourselves with some warmth, wisdom, and kindness. It's not an easy task. So recognizing when parents are stuck and where you can reach out to help for help from is key in helping you support your children, whatever age. But I do appreciate the particular challenges of adolescence.
Of course. And if there are parents here as well who perhaps you have kids of different ages, and if you have any experience of perhaps helping or encouraging your child to open up when previously they didn't, because it's all parents who are here today. So if anyone here has any advice for others, it will definitely be really warmly appreciated.
Lots of parents say to me, Mariota, that big and meaningful conversations happen in the car. And I know in different roles I've had when I have been taking care of children in some of the looked after children positions I've had, and it may be they're in the car with me, often sat in the back, but focused on the road and half distracted, without the intensity of sat across, music playing in the background, diluting the intensity of conversations can have open up an opportunity. And if there is some shared sporting activity on the way there or back, or whilst you're waiting, just like I say, opening up general conversations for general chit chat will enable when you need to talk about more taxing issues. And we do know that sitting down and having a meal with your children is advantageous to their achievement and their well-being. Cooking meals together, I know it's really hard to get adolescents involved in games, but thinking about what you can do that's age appropriate. Video nights, film Fridays, pizza picnic, whatever it is. I think sometimes just finding something, that a hobby or an interest, things that they can tolerate, trying to get alongside them in that.
Yeah. And of course, when it's these, because parents worry so much about their kids, and that if they want to talk about something, I imagine it being really hard not to just go straight in there, straight in there to the core of the issue. But what you're saying is finding ways which are really non-confrontational and gentle, and kind of having that warm and open relationship can help parents lead into these really important conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. And I had just one last question before we move to questions from the parents who are here. So anyone who does have any questions for Louise, please drop them in the Q&A or in the chat if that's easier to find, and then I'll ask Louise them for you. But just the very last question, and one which is possibly, I mean, it's definitely a sensitive one, but of course, when we're talking about children being bullied by other children, within this situation, there are the parents of kids who are doing the bullying themselves. And of course, in this sort of conversation, it could be easy to put all of the shame on that child, or to see the child who is the bully as, you know, to demonize a child who is bullying, when of course they are a child too, with their own kind of reasons and problems as well. I just wonder, Louise, if you have any advice to a parent for how, for like the best way, if there is one, to react if it's claimed that their child has been bullying another child.
It's interesting you say, is there a best one? It's often so unique to the individual, but there's lots of similarities to what I've said earlier about how you support your child if they are being bullied, to if your child has been accused of being the bully. So it's really important that we can stay calm. You know, of course, that will get people's emotions heightened, but whoever shares this with you, you know, reassure the person that you've taken it seriously, what they've shared, and you'll be looking further into it. You know, be open, just as I said earlier, seeking to understand what's going on, get the different perspectives by people, try and remain curious no matter how you might be feeling emotionally. And just like you said, take out whatever might be described as bullying behaviour from the child as a person, because it can be very judgmental and very shaming. But again, you know, if you're talking to your child or trying to get to the bottom of whether this has happened, you know, those non-conflictual, subtle and steady and a measured approach is going to enable you. So trying to find the connection, as I said earlier, trying to find those positive times to be alongside each other and open up the opportunity to talk, being available to keep trying to have those conversations. And like you said, Mariota, it might well be that if the child is found to be being bullied, it might be that there is something that's driving that behaviour. So to be curious about possibly what the behaviour might be communicating, and is there an unmet need, accidentally or more deliberately, in the child? Is the child feeling that they can't find their place in a social group, or are they seeing and hearing music and videos and messages of people who have got a bit of a bullying approach around others, and that's getting some kudos? You know, there's so many factors that come together: the social, the emotional, the behavioural, the developmental, you know, the educational, the environmental. So thinking about what might be possibly explaining a child's behaviour in all of those different areas, and is there an unmet need in one of those areas that's motivating or contributing to perhaps the bullying behaviour? Has the child got some difficulty in understanding social rules? You know, do they understand the impact of you know, sarcasm or doublespeak that might be undermining of a child, but that child might experience it as bullying? Is there some social communication and understanding difficulty to perhaps? So it would be about seeking to understand, definitely, and that non-judgmental, non-shaming approach, but to be able to clearly state that it's unacceptable, that you're committed to helping them understand and develop and change, and to work with others, and trying to come up with a good understanding and a good plan as how it will be managed, or how a child can make amends. And if there are people around you that can support you in supporting your child, if this is the case and your child may be bullying another, reach out to them, get the advice and guidance. It's, as you've heard me talk, it's quite a skilled approach, and we're not all taught these skills as general parents. So look upward and outward and ask for advice of professionals and family and friends.
So essentially, with the few kind of key differences there, essentially it's a very, very similar approach to helping a child who is bullying, as to in terms of being, you know, connected with the school, connected with other, like with the other people in the child's ecosystem, reaching out to other resources if you can, having those lines of communication open with your child, or finding a way to open them up if they're closed or difficult to access.
Yeah. And holding on to your own emotions, and trying not to bring too much of yourself or overread into things. I know lots of parents will say, oh my goodness, what will people think of me? It's a reflection on me, and that can sometimes act as a barrier to seeking to understand and best managing. It's a very tricky experience for parents to manage.
Yeah, and I guess that's why having a kind of a broader support system with the school, as we say, other resources, etc., to help you know that you're not alone in tackling this situation. You won't be the first parent to have come across this this problem either.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what being kind to yourself, as Louise says, can help you get through to a solution in time. Right, we've got a few questions now. Thank you so much for those answers, Louise. They're so helpful. I found them really helpful, and I really hope that the parents here today will be able to put some of your suggestions into action as well.
Yeah, me too. I mean, lots of parents are already on the first rung on the ladder of helping their child if this has happened, or they're preparing themselves because they're here, aren't they? You're here wanting to gain more knowledge and more skill. So it's very well intended, and your commitment is, very gratefully appreciated.
Yeah, and we have a few questions here, and if anyone has any more questions, we've probably got time to answer more than the ones that we have just here. And you, just so you know as well, you can ask questions anonymously. So if you didn't want your name or details to be shared, you can just ask without your name, and I'll ask them to Louise for you. So we have the first question here. If the person who's asked this did want to clarify, I'm not sure, maybe Louise will understand it better than I do, but we have the, sorry, my Siri went on there, but no, Siri, I'm not part of this webinar. I'm asking Louise, not Siri. So, sorry, the question here is, what is the difference between resilience and being bullied? Do you get what that means, Louise?
Well, we've talked about bullying coming from another where there's a power imbalance, and it's persistent and repeated and targeted. Resilience is a skill and a term that we use to describe how we can manage challenges, whether that be social or emotional. And there's a danger where we say, look, let's get more resilient to psychological hardships and bullying, but what we have to acknowledge is bullying is unacceptable, shouldn't be tolerated, shouldn't be ignored. So branches of a tree will bend in the wind, but they break when the force is unreasonable. So although we can help children weather the storm of psychological challenges through all the things that we've mentioned, I wouldn't want to emphasise building resilience in the child, because it locates the responsibility in the child, and it's a much bigger issue. So I suppose I've talked around those two key terms. I hope that it might offer something to that particular question, but if the person wants to clarify, I'll happily go again.
Thank you so much. And we have another question here. So when a child is being bullied, being excluded from events, etc., is changing school a solution? Or is it better to coach them to focus on other friendships and coach them to overcome the adversity? Which is better, move on or overcome it?
It's a question that I get asked a lot. And I think we've got to ask ourselves, what meaning would the child make of being moved? Would they locate the problem within themselves? So if it is a workable option, if there's still opportunity for change, there's still options to have a go at, I'd always encourage parents to try that first. Try that first in the way that we've described so far. And then, if it's not happening the way that we need, we can look at changing school as another option. My mind is that there may be some danger in the child who moves school thinking that they're the problem. Having said that, if change does not happen and your child is at risk of bullying, and you've found an environment that you think will better suit their needs and put an end to the bullying, then you want to better protect your children, and I respect that decision in parents. But it would be understanding maybe why what has happened, developing understanding, maybe developing the skills around that as best we can. So maybe that the bullying from one school doesn't get transferred into another, perhaps. So I wish I did have a watertight answer for you. It's not always that easy, but I think if there are options, there are workable potential solutions that you can have a go at to do that in that organised way I've described, before jumping to a move for the reasons I've just mentioned.
And it sounds like, as you suggested before, just like making these decisions in discussion with other people in the child's community, whether it's the school, perhaps the alternative school, these other mental health resources that you've recommended as well.
Yeah.
And we have another question here. How do I convince a child to seek help from a psychologist when she says, I do not have a problem? The others have because they bully me. So why do I have to seek help? That sounds like a fair
I know, absolutely. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And the youngster in this particular scenario is quite right. If they are being bullied, and they're no part or contributing into that, as often is the case, why should they seek help? I get it. I absolutely get it, which is why the parents should be speaking to the school and having the school and teachers take responsibility for managing the other child and working with the other child's family. I suppose the reasoning I might share for somebody who's experiencing bullying is that is a very, very difficult and tough life experience to go through, that none of us know how to manage, but there are trained professionals that might be able to help us weather the storm. It's almost like I use that metaphor of dropping an anchor from a boat in the storm. Dropping the anchor doesn't stop the storm, but it might help the boat weather the storm, so the least amount of impact is had. But to really listen to that child saying, I've not got a problem here, the problem is with the other, and thinking about, okay, well, we'll work with the other, but how can we help you survive the other? And it might be that there are a range of other sort of supportive structures that might not be traditional therapy. Like I say, Kooth, the online text and messaging service, the online forums, there might be a therapeutic approach and help that's not, turning up and seeing a therapist face to face, for example, or agreeing to give things a go, just for one or two times. Therapists, we're very creative in how we can engage individuals who may find it hard to participate in therapy. So I know with youngsters that come to see me, often I would email them in advance, describing a little bit about me. They may well have Googled me and seen a picture, but if not, I might well have attached a picture. I talk with the parents about their children's interests. Certainly in this weather, there was always a hot chocolate and a packet of Cadbury's Fingers going spare for those that might just need a little bit of sweetness to sweeten them into the therapy. And we're very collaborative. We got a child's pace and we try and make it very comfortable. And there may be some introductions, emails or texts or quick telephone or video calls that can be had to increase engagement, to get a feel of the therapist and what therapy or speaking to somebody might feel like. But like you said, this child's got the right idea. If somebody else is hurting them, why should they have to be seen as the person that needs to do something about it? I get that. Yeah,
and it's I guess a big part of that is changing the perception of a psychologist or psychotherapist as someone who's for someone who something is wrong with, rather than someone who is there to help you if you have a problem, or if something has happened to you which is difficult. I think the sort of the biscuits and the chocolate and the kind of nice face, nice person, I think those are all elements which can help reduce that fear for teenagers, having with the teens who I've tutored in the years as well. It's just like that, whatever can make it just less of the idea of like a doctor with a stethoscope, and more just like a really nice person who's really well positioned to help you.
Yeah, and we can think about different environments that might be most helpful to opening up. Often we do see people in the community, but like I say, we do see people online. I've done lots of walkabouts if it's okay to talk and it's not very public and it's in a very quiet area, going out for a walk and engaging with a child. There are lots of things that we can do, and it's very rare that you would sit across from a child engaged in a deep and meaningful conversation that you might do with an adult. If they like certain games that they can bring with them, if they're into certain books. I mean, one of my occupational hazards is watching and reading teen drama, because I can't get enough of it. But a lot of the adolescents that I might well support are into all sorts of things. So we work very hard as psychologists and therapists trying to find a window to your child or adolescent's world. And hopefully they'll welcome us in briefly. It might be tolerable for us to be as part of their world, but we'll follow them at their pace. If you do have any reservations about speaking to a therapist or your child, you can give the therapist the heads up, and then they know how best to respond, to lean in, how best to engage. And we often say, give us a try, and if you don't, that's fine. You'll never be forced to do anything that you don't want to do.
And thank you to the parent who asked those 2 questions, Sarah. That was really great to open up those topics. And we have a last question here. My 13-year-old son seems to be a target of a boy in his school year. I suspect this boy feels threatened by my son in some way. One reason being my son is good at sport. My son doesn't want me to speak with school. The boy is always with others of the same year and those much older. My son says he can look after himself, but I believe there will be trouble. What can I do? My son is a sensitive soul and it bothers him. Mm-hmm. And we do just have 1 more minute of this. I mean, we can go sort of 1 or 2 minutes over, but it is just the last couple of minutes.
It's very difficult, isn't it, when children are saying to us, please do not interfere, for a fear of interfering, making it worse. That harks back to some of the earlier advice that might be useful for you kind of to review. But we do really need to respect your child's wishes, but also share the dilemma that as parents, it's heartbreaking to anticipate or to tolerate children being hurt and harmed, and trying to come up with some plan that might be mutually agreeable, might not be exactly what the child wants or exactly what the parent wants. But if the child doesn't think it's that big a thing, it might be opening opportunities with podcasts or watching documentaries, or, trying to increase their exposure to messages online, or reading on TV or from other people that might be able to highlight the importance of the experience that they're going through, and need to intervene earlier. But I absolutely hear what the parent's saying. The child does not want you to interfere, but the parent's worried that what they can see might develop into something more problematic. So there's a real pressure for the parent not to sit in, a real sense of urgency, but that the child's holding them back. So we've got to think of some compromise to keep that positive connection going and work with them.
Yeah, I guess talking to them, as you say, I'm just sort of thinking to myself, like, think of so many times where I told my mum when I was a teenager something at home in confidence, and she would go around me and phone up and sort of tell on these kids. And I mean, I don't know how useful this is, Louise, but I'm still annoyed about it now, because it was that break in confidence, and kids, the confidence between a child and their parent is so valuable, isn't it? But it's such a tricky situation as both the parent and you described, because it's so hard to know how you can step in and protect these kids.
Yeah, it is, but it's unacceptable, isn't it, bullying? And there's a strong desire by parents to nip it in the bud before it gets to be problematic, because of the long-lasting impact we've described. So it's very skillful, it's very complex. So it's really useful when parents come to webinars like this and speak to professionals, because hopefully you can come up with an individualised way to understand your child's wishes and needs, and a support plan that's going to be most advantageous. And it might be steady steps to success, getting you nearer to your optimum position, but that you might need to go through a subtle, gentle process. Having said that, I wouldn't hesitate if any child was at risk of intervening. It's a parent's job to protect and keep their child safe.
Yeah, Thank you so much for your answers, Louise, and thank you to everyone who's attended tonight, and especially those who asked questions as well. We will send out an email tomorrow with the recording of tonight's event and links to every resource that we've spoken about as well. And so thank you everyone so much again, and thanks most of all to Louise. And
Pleasure.
see you all soon. Bye
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye.
Bye.